It was one of those quiet Tuesday evenings when nothing much ever happens in the suburbs, the kind of evening where families are sitting down for dinner, kids are finishing their homework, and the streets are peaceful under the soft glow of streetlights. Two police officers were driving their patrol car through the neighborhood, finishing up what had been a pretty routine shift. They'd responded to a couple of minor calls, helped an elderly man whose car had broken down, and checked on a few businesses to make sure everything was locked up properly. The older officer, who had been on the force for almost 15 years, was telling his younger partner about his weekend plans. His daughter's birthday was coming up and he was trying to figure out what gift to get her. The younger officer, who'd only been working in this precinct for about 8 months, was laughing at a story about a cake disaster from last year's celebration. The radio had been quiet for the past hour, and both officers were looking forward to heading back to the station and calling it a night. As they approached a red light near the entrance to Riverside Park, the older officer slowed the patrol car to a stop. The park was mostly empty at this hour, with just a few streetlights illuminating the main pathways. The playground equipment cast long shadows across the grass, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees that lined the walking trails. It was peaceful, ordinary, just another evening in a town where serious crime was rare and most people knew their neighbors by name. But then something caught the younger officer's attention. A small shadow moved near the sidewalk just at the edge of the headlight's reach. Before she could even point it out to her partner, a tiny figure appeared right next to her window, so suddenly that it made her jump slightly in her seat. It was a little girl, and she was pressing her hands against the glass, her face filled with an urgency that immediately set off alarm bells in both officers' minds. The girl looked to be about 7 years old, maybe 8 at the most. Her dark hair was messy and tangled, hanging around her face in knots that looked like they hadn't seen a brush in days. Her cheeks were dirty and streaked with the tracks of dried tears, and fresh ones were forming in her eyes as she stared at the officers through the window. She was wearing a pink jacket that might have been bright and new once, but now it was covered in dirt and had a tear along one sleeve that exposed the thin shirt underneath. Her jeans were muddy at the knees and her sneakers were scuffed and wet. The younger officer's training kicked in immediately. But so did something else, a maternal instinct that made her heart clench at the sight of this clearly distressed child. She glanced quickly at her partner, who was already reaching for the radio, his face serious and focused. But before either of them could speak, the little girl's voice came through, muffled by the glass but desperate enough to be clearly heard. "Please," the child said, her voice shaking but determined. "You have to come with me. Right now, please." The younger officer carefully opened her door, making sure to move slowly so she wouldn't frighten the girl any more than she clearly already was. The older officer stepped out on his side of the car, speaking quietly into his radio to let dispatch know their location and that they were investigating a situation with a minor child. The last thing they needed was to lose track of this girl or to have something happen without anyone knowing where they were. The cool evening air carried the smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke from someone's fireplace. The younger officer crouched down to be at eye level with the little girl, keeping her voice soft and gentle, the way she'd been trained to speak to children in distress. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said quietly. "My name is Officer Rodriguez, but you can call me Officer Sarah if that's easier. What's your name?" The little girl wiped at her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "My name is Emma," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on her own name. "Please, you have to help. There's no time to explain everything right now. They really need help. Please come with me." The older officer, whose nameplate read Chen, stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. He'd been doing this job long enough to know that frightened children needed space, needed to feel like they had some control over the situation. "Emma, that's a really pretty name," he said warmly. "We definitely want to help, but we need to know what's happening. Are you hurt?"
Is someone else hurt?
Emma shook her head frantically, her tangled hair flying around her face. "I'm okay, but my mama isn't okay. And the baby keeps crying, and I think something's really wrong. I've been watching the street for hours, waiting for a police car to come by. Please, I'll show you where they are, but we have to go now. It's getting dark and it's cold and I don't know what else to do." The two officers exchanged another glance, this one filled with concern and questions. A mother and a baby in trouble somewhere. But where? And why had this child been watching the street for hours? Where were they that this little girl had to run out looking for help instead of calling for an ambulance? Before they could ask any more questions, Emma had already started moving. She grabbed Officer Sarah's hand with her small, cold fingers and began pulling her toward the park entrance. "This way," she insisted. "Please, please hurry. I'll explain while we walk, but we can't waste any more time." Officer Chen quickly locked the patrol car and grabbed his flashlight from his belt. The sun had already set completely, and while the main areas of the park had lighting, he had a feeling they weren't going to stay in the well-lit sections. He radioed their situation again, letting dispatch know they were following a child into Riverside Park and might need backup depending on what they found. Emma led them past the playground, past the community center building that was locked up for the night, and toward the walking trails that wound through the wooded section of the park. The streetlights didn't reach this far, and Officer Chen clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the growing darkness. Officer Sarah kept her hand gently on Emma's shoulder, both to comfort the girl and to make sure she didn't suddenly run off into the shadows where they might lose sight of her. "Emma, honey," Officer Sarah said as they walked quickly along the paved trail. "I need you to tell me what's happening. Who needs help? Where are we going?" Emma's voice came out in rushed bursts as she walked as fast as her short legs could carry her. "It's my mama and my baby sister and my brother and my other sister. We've been staying in the woods because we had nowhere else to go. Mama said we'd be okay, that she had a plan, but she's been getting sicker and sicker. She's really hot, like burning up hot, and she's shaking, and the baby won't stop crying no matter what we do. My brother tried to help, but he's only 9 and he doesn't know what to do either. I'm really scared." The officers felt their hearts sink at the child's words. A family living in the woods, a sick mother, a crying baby. This was far more serious than they'd initially thought, and the cool evening suddenly felt much colder as they hurried deeper into the park, following this brave little girl toward whatever desperate situation awaited them in the darkness ahead. The paved trail seemed to go on forever in the darkness, winding through trees that grew thicker and closer together the further they walked from the main park area. Officer Chen kept his flashlight pointed ahead, watching for any obstacles or potential dangers, while Officer Sarah stayed close to Emma, one hand still resting protectively on the child's shoulder. The little girl was moving with remarkable speed and determination, her small feet sure and steady on the path despite the darkness and her obvious exhaustion. "Emma, slow down just a little bit, sweetie," Officer Sarah called out gently. "We're right behind you, I promise. We're not going anywhere. Just don't want you to trip and hurt yourself." But Emma barely slowed her pace. She glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes reflecting the flashlight beam like a frightened animal. "I can't slow down," she said, her voice tight with worry. "What if something happens while we're walking? What if Mama gets worse? I've already been gone for almost an hour looking for help." Officer Chen felt his chest tighten at those words. This child had been wandering the streets alone for an hour, looking for someone to help her family. In the dark. In the cold. At her age, he remembered, his own daughter wouldn't even go to the bathroom alone at night without calling for him or his wife. The bravery and desperation it must have taken for Emma to leave her sick mother and siblings to go searching for help was almost overwhelming to think about. "You did exactly the right thing." "Emma," he said firmly, making sure his voice carried confidence and reassurance, "you were very brave to come find us. Your mama is going to be so proud of you." They'd been walking for about 5 minutes when Emma suddenly veered off the main trail. If you weren't looking carefully, you'd miss it completely. There was a small gap between 2 large bushes, the kind of place that kids might discover while exploring, or that someone desperate might find when looking for a place to hide. Emma pushed through the branches without hesitation, holding them aside as best she could for the officers following behind her. Officer Sarah felt branches catch at her uniform and scratch at her hands as she pushed through. This definitely wasn't an official park trail. On the other side of the bushes, there was a narrow dirt path, barely visible even with the flashlight. It was clear that this trail wasn't maintained by the Park Service. Fallen leaves covered it completely, and small branches and roots crossed the path in several places. The trees grew so close together overhead that even during the daytime, this area would be dim and shadowy. "How did you find this place?" Officer Chen asked, his voice careful and neutral. He wasn't judging, just trying to understand. Emma's voice came from ahead of them in the darkness. "Mama found it when we first had to leave the shelter. She used to bring us to this park when things were good, before everything got bad. She remembered there were old buildings back here from when the park was first built. She said if we could just stay hidden for a little while, she could save enough money to get us a real place to live, somewhere safe where my father could never find us. Those last words hung heavy in the air. Officer Sarah and Officer Chen exchanged glances again, and this time they understood even more. This wasn't just about homelessness. This was about a family running from something dangerous, from someone dangerous. This was about a mother making an impossible choice between the streets, a shelter where she'd been found, or hiding in the woods. The narrow path twisted and turned, going deeper into the woods. Officer Chen marked their route carefully in his mind, noticing landmarks. A tree with a split trunk, a large boulder covered in moss, a fallen log that Emma climbed over with practiced ease while the officers had to step carefully around it. This little girl had walked this path many times, probably several times a day, to keep her family supplied with whatever they needed. "Do you walk to the store?" Officer Sarah asked gently, partly to keep Emma talking, and partly because she needed to know how this family had been surviving. "There's a gas station about 15 minutes past the park entrance," Emma explained, her voice slightly out of breath from the quick pace. "I go there to fill up water bottles from the bathroom sink. Sometimes I take the bucket, but that's harder to carry. The lady who works there during the day is nice. She doesn't ask questions. Sometimes she gives me crackers or fruit and says it's old and they were going to throw it away anyway, but I think she's just being nice." Officer Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. This child, this tiny brave child, had been making trips to a gas station to get water for her family, carrying heavy bottles and buckets through the woods, probably hungry herself but making sure her younger siblings and baby sister had what they needed. "That lady sounds very kind," Officer Sarah said softly. "What's your brother's name?" "And your other sister?" "My brother is Tommy, he's 9. And he thinks he's so grown up," Emma said. And despite everything, there was a hint of typical sibling annoyance in her voice that made her sound like a regular kid for just a moment. "My little sister is Sophie. She just turned 5 last month. We couldn't have a real party with a cake, but Mama made her a crown out of flowers and we sang to her. And the baby is Grace, she's only 4 months old. She cries a lot now because I think she's hungry all the time. Mama can't make enough milk for her anymore." The path opened up slightly, and Officer Chen's flashlight beam swept across the area ahead. They were in a part of the park that clearly hadn't been used in years. There were remnants of old park infrastructure. A rusted metal sign lay on the ground, its words too faded to read. What might have once been a small parking area was now completely overgrown with weeds and small saplings. And ahead, barely visible through the overgrown vegetation, was the outline of a small building. Emma stopped suddenly and turned to face the officers. In the flashlight beam, they could see that her face was a mixture of hope and fear. "That's where they are," she whispered, pointing at the old shed. "Please don't be mad at my mama. She's not a bad person. She's a really good mama. She's just been trying to keep us safe and together. She didn't want to split us up in foster care. She said she'd rather die than let that happen." Officer Sarah knelt down in front of Emma, not caring that the damp ground was soaking through her uniform pants. She took both of the little girl's cold hands in hers. "Sweetheart, listen to me very carefully. We are not mad at your mama. We are not here to take you away from her. We are here to help. That's our job. That's what we do. We help people who need it. Your mama needs help and you were brave enough to ask for it. That makes you a hero, do you understand? You saved your family tonight." Emma's face crumpled and fresh tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Promise? You promise you won't take us away from her?" "I promise we're here to help," Officer Sarah said firmly. "Now let's go take care of your mama and your brother and sisters, okay?" Emma nodded and wiped her nose on her sleeve. She turned toward the old shed and called out softly, "Mama, Tommy, it's me. I brought help. Don't be scared." Officer Chen approached the shed carefully. His flashlight pointed downward so it wouldn't be blinding to anyone inside. The building was old, probably dating back 40 or 50 years when this part of the park had been more actively used. The wooden walls were weathered and gray, and vines had grown up and over much of the structure. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. From inside they heard a woman's voice, weak and frightened. "Emma, baby, is that you?" "It's me, Mama," Emma called back, her voice stronger now that help was finally here. "I brought police officers, good ones. They're going to help us." Officer Chen carefully pushed open the door, which creaked loudly in protest. He moved his flashlight slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the interior. And what he saw inside that old shed made him understand exactly why Emma had been so desperate, why she'd been so brave, and why this family had been so frightened to ask for help until they'd truly had no other choice left. The inside of the shed was nothing like what the officers expected. Despite the desperate circumstances, it was clear that someone had worked incredibly hard to make this space livable, to turn this abandoned building into something that could shelter a family. The beam from Officer Chen's flashlight revealed details that told a story of both resourcefulness and heartbreaking necessity. Old blankets had been hung on the walls, probably for insulation against the cold autumn nights. Some were held up with nails, others with tape that was starting to peel away. There were at least a dozen blankets covering the walls, creating layers of fabric that would help keep the wind out. In one corner, more blankets were piled up to create what looked like sleeping areas. A few thin pillows that had clearly been rescued from somewhere were arranged carefully. There were even some stuffed animals, worn and loved, tucked into the makeshift beds. But it was the corner furthest from the door that made both officers freeze for a moment, their professional training battling with their very human emotional reactions. A woman sat propped against the wall, wrapped in multiple layers of clothing and blankets. Her face was pale and covered in sweat despite the cold air. Her hair hung in damp strands around her face, and her eyes were glassy with fever. But even in her clearly ill state, those eyes were alert and filled with the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her children. In her arms, wrapped in what looked like every piece of soft fabric that could be spared, was a tiny baby. The infant was making small, weak crying sounds, the kind that come from a baby too exhausted or too hungry to cry properly anymore. Next to the woman, pressed against her side, was a little girl who looked to be about 5 years old. She had the same dark hair as Emma, pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly fallen apart. Her eyes were huge in her small face, and she was staring at the police officers with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Standing between his family and the officers, trying his best to look brave and tough despite the fear obvious in his face, was a boy of about 9. He was thin, too thin, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and even though he was clearly terrified of what these police officers might do, he wasn't backing down. He was prepared to protect his mother and sisters with everything he had. "Please," the woman whispered, and her voice was so hoarse and weak that Officer Sarah had to step closer to hear her properly. "Please don't take my babies, please. I know we shouldn't be here. I know this isn't right. But please, I'm begging you, don't separate us. Don't put them in the system. They belong together. They belong with me." Officer Sarah held up her hands in a peaceful gesture and knelt down, making herself less threatening. "Ma'am, my name is Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Chen. We're not here to take your children away. We're here because your very brave daughter Emma came and found us because you need help. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to help you." The woman's eyes filled with tears and her whole body seemed to sag with relief mixed with exhaustion. "Her name is Emma," she said, almost as if she was introducing her daughter properly, making sure these officers knew her child was a person with a name, not just a homeless kid. "She's 7. The boy is Tommy, he's 9. That's Sophie, she's 5. And this is baby Grace, she's 4 months old. They're good kids. Such good kids. This isn't their fault. None of this is their fault." Officer Chen was already speaking quietly into his radio, calling for an ambulance and giving their exact location as best he could describe it. "We need medical assistance urgently," he said into the radio. "Mother with high fever appears severely ill. Infant approximately 4 months old, showing signs of distress. We'll need guidance bringing the ambulance to this location. Also need social services standby, but this is a medical emergency first." While he handled the logistics, Officer Sarah moved closer to the family. The little 5-year-old Sophie shrank back against her mother, but she didn't cry out. The baby's weak whimpering continued. Tommy, the 9-year-old boy, kept his position, but his tough expression was starting to crack. "Tommy, is it?" Officer Sarah asked gently. The boy gave a tiny nod. "Tommy, you've been taking care of your family, haven't you? Being the man of the house?" That did it. Tommy's face crumpled and tears started streaming down his cheeks. "I tried," he choked out. "I tried so hard. I helped Emma carry water. I made sure Sophie ate before we did. I tried to keep Mama warm and help with the baby. But I don't know how to make Mama better. I don't know how to make Grace stop crying. I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough. I tried so hard. The boy's anguish was so raw, so honest that both officers felt their own eyes burning with tears. This child had been carrying the weight of his entire family on his young shoulders, trying to do the job of an adult when he should have been worrying about homework and video games. Officer Sarah looked around the small space more carefully, and the more she saw, the more her heart broke. There was a small camping stove in the corner, the kind you could buy at any outdoor store, but it was clearly running low on fuel. Next to it were a few pots and a couple of plastic plates. There were juice boxes stacked in a corner, probably chosen because they didn't need refrigeration. A couple of cans of soup sat nearby, along with some crackers and a jar of peanut butter. It wasn't much, but it represented careful planning and rationing. Several 1-gallon water jugs were lined up against the wall, some full and some empty. There was a bucket that had apparently been used for washing. A small battery-powered lantern sat on a makeshift shelf made from a piece of wood balanced on some bricks. There were books, probably from the library, carefully protected in plastic bags. Someone had been trying to make sure the kids kept learning, kept reading, even in these impossible circumstances. "How long have you been living here?" Officer Chen asked, his voice carefully neutral and non-judgmental. The woman took a shaky breath. 3 weeks, she said quietly. Almost 3 weeks now. We were at the shelter before this. I was working 2 jobs, going to school at night, saving every penny I could. I had a plan. I was going to get us out. But my ex-husband, their father, he found us. He came to the shelter, made a scene, threatened everyone. The shelter, they had to ask us to leave. They had other families, other women and children, and they couldn't risk everyone's safety because of him. She paused, coughing, and the sound rattled in her chest in a way that made Officer Sarah's concern spike even higher. The woman was seriously ill, possibly with pneumonia or something equally dangerous. How long had she been running this fever? How had she been trying to care for a newborn while this sick? I couldn't go to my family, the woman continued when her coughing stopped. He knows where they live. He's already hurt my sister once when she tried to help us. I couldn't put them at risk. I couldn't risk the streets with 4 kids, especially with Grace being so little. And I absolutely could not let them go into foster care. I've heard the stories. I know sometimes kids get separated, sent to different homes. These kids have been through enough. They need each other. They need me. So I remembered this place from before, from when things were good, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could keep us safe here until I figured something else out. Emma had come into the shed and immediately went to her mother's side. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I know you said to only get help if it was really, really, really an emergency. But you've been so sick and Grace won't eat and I didn't know what else to do." The woman pulled Emma close with one arm, the other still supporting baby Grace. "You did perfect. Baby girl," she said, her voice breaking. "You did exactly right. I'm not mad. I could never be mad at you for trying to save us." Officer Chen finished his radio conversation and turned to the family. "Okay, here's what's going to happen," he said, and his voice was firm but kind. "An ambulance is on the way. They're bringing a guide team to help bring the paramedics here to this location. You and the baby are going to the hospital because you both need medical care. The other kids are going to come with us and we're going to make sure they're warm, fed and safe while the doctors take care of you." "No." The woman's voice rose in panic. "No, please, you can't separate us. They need to stay with me. They'll be scared without me." "Ma'am, listen to me," Officer Sarah said, her voice gentle but urgent. "You are very sick. You need a doctor. Your baby needs a doctor, and your other children need to be somewhere warm and safe while that happens. I promise you, I absolutely promise you, we are not taking them away forever. We are getting everyone the help they need. But right now, tonight, the most important thing is making sure you don't get any sicker. Making sure that baby is okay. And making sure these other kids are taken care of. They're going to be scared, yes, but they're going to be safe. Do you understand?" The woman looked at each of her children in turn. Tommy trying so hard to be brave, Sophie clutching her mother's arm, Emma, who had just walked through dark streets alone to find help, and baby Grace, who had barely made a sound beyond weak whimpers for hours now. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, but please, please don't lose them. Please don't let them disappear into the system, please." The sound of the ambulance siren grew louder, and soon flashlights from the paramedics and the guide team lit up the narrow forest path. The response team arrived with professional efficiency. But even these experienced emergency workers paused for a moment when they saw the makeshift shelter and understood what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was a family that had been surviving against impossible odds. The paramedics immediately began assessing Rebecca and baby Grace. Rebecca's temperature was dangerously high at 103.7 degrees. Her breathing was labored, and when they listened to her lungs, the rattling sound confirmed what everyone feared. She had developed a serious respiratory infection, possibly pneumonia. Baby Grace was severely dehydrated and underweight for her age. Both needed immediate hospitalization. While the medical team worked, Officer Sarah stayed close to the three older children. Tommy had finally let his guard down and was crying silently, his thin shoulders shaking. Sophie clung to Emma's hand, her eyes enormous as she watched strangers touch her mother and baby sister. Emma stood very still, very quiet, but her face showed the strain of the last few hours, the last few weeks, catching up with her all at once. "Kids," Officer Sarah said softly, kneeling down to their level. "I know this is scary. I know you want to stay with your mom, but she needs to go to the hospital so doctors can make her feel better. And they need to check on Grace, too. You three are going to come with me and Officer Chen. We're going to make sure you get some dinner, some warm clothes, and a safe place to sleep tonight. And I promise you, we're going to let you talk to your mom as soon as the doctors say it's okay." "What if she doesn't come back?" Sophie whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost in the commotion of the emergency response. "What if they keep her and we never see her again?" Officer Sarah felt her heart clench. This 5-year-old child was articulating a fear that all three kids clearly shared. They'd been let down by the system before, by the shelter that couldn't keep them safe, by a father who should have protected them but instead had become the thing they needed protection from. Why should they trust that these promises were any different? "Sophie, look at me," Officer Sarah said gently, waiting until the little girl's eyes met hers. "Your mama is going to get better. She's strong and the doctors are going to help her. And then she's going to come back to you. That's a promise. Officer Chen and I are going to make sure of it." As the paramedics prepared to transport Rebecca and Grace to the hospital, Rebecca called out weakly for her children. All three rushed to her side, and even the paramedics paused to let them have a moment together. "Listen to me," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse but urgent. "I need you all to be brave a little bit longer. Just a little bit longer. Tommy, you're my strong boy. Watch out for your sisters, okay? Emma, baby, you were so brave tonight. I'm so proud of you. Keep being brave. Sophie, sweet girl, I love you so much. I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to come back for you. All of you. Do you hear me? I'm coming back for you." "We love you, Mama," Emma said, speaking for all three of them. "We'll be good. We'll wait for you." The ambulance team carefully loaded Rebecca and Grace onto stretchers, and the children watched with tear-stained faces as their mother and baby sister were carried away through the woods. The lights from the ambulance disappeared down the trail, and suddenly the forest seemed very dark and very empty. Officer Chen and Officer Sarah led the three children back through the woods toward the patrol car. They moved slowly, making sure the kids could keep up, especially little Sophie, who was clearly exhausted. When they reached the car, Officer Chen opened the back door and helped all three children inside. He turned the heat up, and soon warm air was flooding the vehicle. "When did you last eat?" Officer Sarah asked, turning around in her seat to look at the kids. Tommy and Emma exchanged glances. "We had some crackers this morning," Tommy said quietly. "And we shared a can of soup for lunch. We were saving the rest for dinner, but then Mama got really sick and we forgot about eating." It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. These children hadn't eaten a proper meal in over 12 hours, and from the looks of them, they hadn't been eating enough for weeks. Officer Sarah pulled out her phone and made a quick call to dispatch. "We need to take these kids to the station for processing, but they haven't eaten. Is there any way we can get some food brought in? Something kid-friendly, warm if possible?" She listened for a moment, then smiled. "Perfect. Thank you." She turned back to the children. "Good news. By the time we get to the police station, there's going to be some dinner waiting for you. How does pizza sound?" For the first time since they'd found the family, a spark of something like hope appeared in Tommy's eyes. "Real pizza?" he asked, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Real pizza," Officer Chen confirmed from the driver's seat. "And I happen to know the sergeant on duty tonight always keeps ice cream in the break room freezer. I bet we could find some of that too." As they drove through the streets back toward the station, Officer Sarah began to gently ask questions. She needed to understand the full situation, needed to know what had brought this family to such a desperate place, and slowly, in bits and pieces, the story came out. Rebecca had been married to a man named David for 11 years. At first, everything seemed normal, even good. But after Tommy was born, things started to change. David became controlling, jealous, angry. The verbal abuse started first, then the pushing and shoving, and eventually the violence became regular and severe. Rebecca tried to hide it, tried to protect the children, tried to make things work because she'd grown up believing that families stayed together no matter what. But two things changed her mind. First, David started directing his anger at the children too, especially Tommy. And second, when Emma was born, Rebecca looked at her tiny daughter and realized she didn't want her little girl to grow up thinking this was what love looked like. She didn't want Tommy to think this was how men should treat their families. She didn't want any of her children to normalize violence and fear, so she started planning. She took a part-time job at a local grocery store and slowly saved money in a secret account David didn't know about. She researched domestic violence resources. She made copies of important documents and hid them at a friend's house. And when David went on a business trip, she packed everything they could carry and left. The domestic violence shelter took them in immediately. Rebecca felt safe for the first time in years. She got a restraining order. She enrolled in community college classes to finish her degree. She worked 2 jobs to save for an apartment. The kids started seeming like regular kids again, laughing and playing, not walking on eggshells waiting for their father's next explosion. But David couldn't let go. He hired a private investigator and tracked them down. He showed up at the shelter in a rage, breaking through the front door, screaming threats, smashing furniture. Security called the police and he was arrested, but the damage was done. The shelter couldn't risk housing Rebecca and her children anymore, not when their presence put all the other residents in danger. Rebecca had been scrambling to find another solution when she discovered she was pregnant with Grace. David had assaulted her one last time before she'd managed to escape, and now she was carrying his child. She considered her options, but in the end, she couldn't bring herself to end the pregnancy. Grace wasn't responsible for who her father was. With no shelter, no family she could risk going to, and not enough money saved for first and last month's rent on an apartment, Rebecca had made the desperate decision to take her kids into hiding. She'd remembered the old shed in the park from years ago when she and David had been dating, and things seemed good before the abuse started. She'd thought maybe they could survive there for a few weeks, just until she got her next paycheck and could find something, anything, even a room to rent. But the stress and the cold and the lack of proper nutrition had taken their toll. Rebecca had given birth to Grace in that shed with only Tommy and Emma there to help. They'd followed instructions Emma had found in a library book, and somehow, miraculously, both mother and baby had survived. But Rebecca had never fully recovered. The infection that was now raging through her body had probably started then. In those desperate hours of childbirth with no medical care, no sterile equipment, no help beyond her terrified children doing their best. Mama kept saying just a little longer, Emma told the officers quietly. Just a few more days until payday. Just another week to save enough. She was trying so hard. She got up every morning and went to work even when she felt terrible. She never complained. She always made sure we ate before she did. She would tell us stories at night to help us fall asleep and forget we were cold and hungry. She's a really good mama. The best mama. Officer Sarah had to wipe her eyes. This story was one she'd heard variations of before in her years on the force, but it never got easier. A mother doing everything right, everything she was supposed to do to escape an abusive situation and still ending up with no good options. A family falling through the cracks despite doing everything they could to save themselves. When they arrived at the police station, the desk sergeant had made good on the promise. Officer Chen couldn't stop thinking about the family even after his shift ended later that night. He sat in his car in the parking lot of the police station, staring at his phone, thinking about his own daughter safe and warm at home with her mother. He thought about Tommy, the 9-year-old boy trying so hard to be the man of the family. He thought about little Sophie's question, what if she doesn't come back? And he thought about Emma, walking through dark streets alone, terrified but determined to save her family. Before he could talk himself out of it, he opened the social media app on his phone and started typing. He was careful with his words, mindful of privacy and protocol, but he told the story. He didn't use names. He didn't give specific locations, but he told the story of a brave little girl who'd begged police officers to follow her and what they'd found in the woods. He told the story of a mother who'd made impossible choices to keep her children safe from abuse and together as a family. He told the story of kids who'd been living in a shed in the forest but still did their homework and read library books and took care of each other. And then he did something he'd never done before in all his years on the force. He asked for help. "This family needs support," he wrote. "They need resources, housing, opportunities. If you're in a position to help, if you know of any programs or services, please reach out to the police department. Let's show this family that their community cares about them." He posted it on the police department's official page and then put his phone away, not really expecting much. Maybe a few shares, maybe some words of encouragement. He drove home, hugged his daughter extra tight, and tried to get some sleep. By the time he woke up the next morning, everything had changed. His phone was flooded with notifications. Hundreds of them, thousands. The post had been shared across the entire city and beyond. Local news stations had picked up the story. The comments section was overwhelming. People were crying over Emma's bravery. Parents were saying they couldn't imagine having to make Rebecca's choices. Everyone wanted to know how they could help. Officer Chen's personal phone started ringing before he'd even finished his morning coffee. It was his lieutenant, and he initially braced himself for a reprimand about posting on social media without approval. But instead, the lieutenant's voice was warm and excited. "Chen, I don't know what you started, but the phone at the station has not stopped ringing since 6 this morning. We've got donations pouring in. We've got organizations offering services. We've got people literally showing up at the station with bags of clothes and toys. We need you to come in early and help us coordinate all this." Officer Chen drove to the station in a daze, still not quite processing what was happening. When he walked through the door, he understood. The lobby looked like a donation center. Bags and boxes were stacked everywhere. Clothing in all sizes, toys and books, gift cards to grocery stores and restaurants, school supplies, diapers and formula for baby Grace, new shoes still in their boxes, warm coats and winter gear. Officer Sarah was already there, her eyes red from crying as she sorted through everything. "Have you seen this?" she asked, gesturing at the overwhelming display. People are amazing. They're absolutely amazing. But the donations were just the beginning. A domestic violence prevention organization had reached out offering free legal services to help Rebecca finalize her divorce and strengthen her restraining order against David. A local dental clinic called to offer free dental care for the whole family. A children's hospital volunteer group wanted to set up a fund for medical expenses. 3 different landlords called offering reduced rent apartments. A church in the downtown area had heard the story and taken up a special collection that morning. They'd raised over $15,000 in a single service. The pastor called personally to say the money was being held in trust for the family, to be used for whatever they needed most, whether that was rent deposits, a reliable car, or education expenses. Local businesses stepped up too. A furniture store offered to furnish an entire apartment for free. A grocery store created a 6-month supply of gift cards. A used car dealership wanted to donate a reliable vehicle so Rebecca could get to work and the kids to school. A clothing boutique prepared complete wardrobes for all 4 children. But perhaps most moving were the letters. Dozens and dozens of handwritten letters from people in the community. Survivors of domestic violence sharing their own stories and offering support. Parents saying they'd been moved to tears by Emma's courage. Teachers offering free tutoring to help the kids catch up on any schoolwork they'd missed. Strangers simply writing to say, "We see you. We care about you. You're not alone anymore." By noon, the local television news crews were at the station wanting to do a story. Officer Chen was hesitant at first, worried about privacy and not wanting to exploit the family's situation. But the public information officer for the department convinced him that sharing the story more widely could bring even more resources and support. That evening, the story aired on the 6 o'clock news. The reporters had done their job well, telling the story with sensitivity and respect, never showing the children's faces or using their full names, focusing instead on the community's response and the resources available for families in similar situations. The segment included an interview with a representative from the domestic violence shelter, explaining why they'd had to make the difficult decision to ask Rebecca to leave. helping viewers understand that shelters operate under strict safety protocols and have to consider the well-being of all residents. The interview emphasized that what happened to Rebecca's family was not about failure on anyone's part, but rather about a system stretched too thin, with too few resources for too many people in crisis. They interviewed a family law attorney who explained the challenges domestic violence survivors face when trying to leave abusive situations, the ways the legal system sometimes fails to adequately protect them, and the reforms needed to better support families like Rebecca's. And they interviewed Officer Chen and Officer Sarah, who both emphasized that they were just doing their jobs, that the real hero of this story was a 7-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to ask for help when her family needed it most. The response to the news coverage was even bigger than the response to the social media post. The phone lines at the police department crashed from the volume of calls. The department's website had to be temporarily shut down because too many people were trying to access it at once to find out how to donate. But there was one call that stood out above all the rest. It came early in the evening, right after the news broadcast ended. Officer Sarah answered it, expecting another offer of donated items or services. Instead, she heard the voice of an older woman, cultured and educated, but warm and sincere. "My name is Helen," the woman said. "Helen Winters. I saw the news story about the family and I'd like to help. I have a large house, much too large for just me since my husband passed away. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a nice yard, in a good school district. It's been sitting mostly empty for the past 2 years while my own children live out of state. I'd like to offer it to this family, not as a temporary placement, as a home, for as long as they need it." Officer Sarah sat up straighter in her chair. "Ma'am, that's incredibly generous, but I have to ask, are you sure you understand what you're offering? This would be a significant commitment." "I'm 71 years old, officer," Helen replied. "I've been a teacher for 43 years before I retired. I've spent my entire adult life working with children and families. I'm not naive about what this would involve, but I know exactly what I'm offering and I'm certain this is what I want to do." Officer Sarah felt chills run down her arms. "Can I ask why?" she said quietly. "Why would you do this for strangers?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Helen spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Because 42 years ago I was Rebecca. Different circumstances, different time, but the same desperate situation. I left my first husband with 2 babies and nothing else. I had no family support, no money, nowhere to go. And a woman I'd never met, a friend of a friend of a friend, took us in. She gave us a room in her house. She watched my babies while I worked. She helped me get back on my feet. She saved our lives." Helen took a shaky breath. "That woman told me that someday when I was able, I should pay it forward. Help someone else the way she helped me. I've been waiting for the right opportunity for decades. I've donated to charities, volunteered at shelters, done what I could, but I've always felt like I was supposed to do more. Something bigger. When I saw that story tonight about that brave little girl leading police officers through the woods to save her family, I knew. This is it. This is how I pay it forward. This is how I honor the woman who saved me all those years ago." Officer Sarah found herself crying openly, not even trying to hide the tears in her voice. "Mrs. Winters, I need to be honest with you. There will be a vetting process, background checks, home inspections, interviews with social workers. This won't be quick or easy. I understand," Helen said calmly. "I'm ready for all of it. I have nothing to hide. My house is clean and safe. My background is spotless. I have the financial means to support myself and help support them if needed." Helen Winters had barely slept the night after she'd made her phone call to the police department. She'd spent the early morning hours preparing one of the upstairs bedrooms, changing the sheets, dusting surfaces that hadn't needed attention in months. She pulled out quilts her late husband's mother had made decades ago, soft and warm and perfect for children. She went through her kitchen cabinets, making mental notes of what foods to buy. What did children like these days? What would a baby need? She'd raised her own 2 children in this house, watched them grow from babies to toddlers to teenagers to adults with children of their own. The house had been filled with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of family life for so many years, and then her husband Robert had gotten sick. And for 2 years the house had been filled with the sounds of medical equipment and quiet conversations with hospice nurses. After he passed, her children had begged her to sell the house, to move into something smaller, something that didn't echo with memories and require so much upkeep. but Helen couldn't bring herself to leave. This house held 50 years of her life. Every room had a story. The kitchen where she'd taught her daughter to bake. The living room where her son had learned to walk. The master bedroom where she'd held Robert's hand in those final days. How could she leave all of that behind? Now, standing in what used to be her daughter's room, Helen felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Purpose. Hope. The sense that her life still had meaning beyond just waiting for her own children to visit once or twice a year. The next morning, Helen dressed carefully in a nice but comfortable outfit. Not too formal. She didn't want to intimidate anyone, but respectable. She wanted Rebecca to see that she was serious, that this wasn't some impulsive whim from a lonely old woman. She drove to the hospital with a basket of homemade cookies because it's what her generation did when visiting someone. You brought food. It was how you showed care. Officer Sarah met her in the hospital lobby. They'd spoken on the phone that morning to coordinate the visit, and Sarah had explained what to expect. Rebecca was much better, but still recovering. She was understandably cautious and overwhelmed. Baby Grace was thriving, and most importantly, Rebecca would be meeting Helen alone first before any decisions were made about the children being involved. "Thank you for doing this," Officer Sarah said as they rode the elevator up to Rebecca's floor. "I know it seems like I'm skeptical, but I've seen too many situations where good intentions aren't enough. I need to know that everyone involved is protected, especially those kids." "I'd be concerned about you if you weren't skeptical," Helen replied warmly. "You're doing your job and you're doing it well. Those children are lucky to have you advocating for them." Rebecca was sitting up in bed when they entered, nervously smoothing the blanket across her lap. She'd been allowed to shower that morning, and her hair was clean and pulled back in a simple ponytail. The hospital had provided her with clean clothes. She looked young, Helen realized. So young to have been through so much. She couldn't be more than 32 or 33 years old, and she had 4 children and was recovering from living in the woods while fleeing abuse. "Rebecca, this is Helen Winters," Officer Sarah said gently. "Mrs. Winters, this is Rebecca Morrison." Helen stepped forward, setting her basket of cookies on the rolling table next to the bed. "Please call me Helen, and these are chocolate chip cookies freshly baked this morning. I wasn't sure what you liked, but I figured cookies are usually a safe bet." Rebecca stared at the cookies, then at Helen, then back at the cookies. "You baked me cookies?" she said, her voice slightly incredulous. "I did," Helen confirmed, pulling a chair closer to the bed and sitting down. "Though I'll be honest, I'm a bit out of practice. My grandchildren tell me I put in too many chocolate chips, but I figure there's no such thing as too much chocolate." A tiny smile appeared on Rebecca's face, the first genuine smile she'd managed in days. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's really kind." They talked for over an hour, with Officer Sarah sitting quietly in the corner, observing but not interfering. Helen asked Rebecca about her children, what they liked, what their personalities were like, what their dreams and fears were. Rebecca spoke about each child with such love and pride that Helen felt her own eyes getting misty. Tommy was serious and responsible, always trying to take care of everyone. He loved building things and taking things apart to figure out how they worked. He wanted to be an engineer someday. Emma was creative and sensitive, always drawing pictures and making up stories. She was the peacemaker among the siblings, always trying to make everyone happy. Sophie was sweet and shy, attached to her stuffed bunny that she'd had since she was a baby. She loved singing and dancing, especially princess movies. And Grace was just a baby, but already she had a personality, alert and curious about everything around her. "They've been through so much," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "They've seen things children shouldn't see. They've been scared and hungry and cold. I tried so hard to shield them from everything, to make it seem like an adventure, like we were camping. But they knew. Kids always know. And I hate that I couldn't give them better. I hate that my failures put them in that situation." "Stop right there," Helen said firmly but kindly. "You listen to me, Rebecca. You did not fail your children. You saved your children. You removed them from an abusive situation. You kept them fed and sheltered and together when you had no resources and no support. You taught them that their safety matters, that abuse is not acceptable, that family means protecting each other. Your daughter Emma learned courage from you. She learned to ask for help when it's needed. Those are invaluable lessons. You didn't fail. You survived, and you taught your children to survive. That's not failure. That's heroism. Rebecca was crying now, and so was Helen, and even Officer Sarah in her corner was wiping her eyes. Sometimes Helen knew. What people needed most wasn't advice or solutions. It was someone to look them in the eye and tell them they'd done enough. They were enough. That they were good and worthy despite everything they'd been through. "Tell me about your house," Rebecca said after she'd composed herself a bit. "Officer Rodriguez said you have a large house?" Helen pulled out her phone and showed Rebecca pictures. The exterior. A classic Victorian with a wraparound porch and a big maple tree in the front yard. The living room with its comfortable couches and the fireplace. The kitchen with its large table that could seat 8 people. The backyard with its swing set that Helen's grandchildren used when they visited. And the bedrooms, 4 of them upstairs, each one spacious and bright. "This used to be my daughter's room," Helen said, showing a picture of a room with pale yellow walls and white furniture. "I thought maybe Emma and Sophie could share it if they wanted, or we could set it up however they'd like. This was my son's room, perfect for Tommy. And this room, the one at the end of the hall, gets the most morning light. I thought it would be perfect for you and baby Grace." Rebecca looked at the photos with an expression of disbelief. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It looks like something out of a magazine. Are you sure you want us there? We don't have much. We'd be bringing chaos and noise and mess into your peaceful home." Helen laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. "Rebecca, I raised 2 children in that house. I've had teenage daughters having emotional meltdowns over homework. I've had teenage sons tracking mud through every room and leaving sports equipment everywhere. I've hosted birthday parties with dozens of screaming children. I've had babies crying at all hours of the night. I've had sick kids throwing up and pets making messes and all the beautiful chaos that comes with family life. That house hasn't been chaotic or noisy in 2 years. And do you know what? It's been painfully quiet. That house needs life in it again. It needs laughter and running feet and the sound of children playing. It needs family, but why us?" Rebecca asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since she'd first heard about Helen's offer. "You don't know us. We could be anyone. How do you know we won't take advantage of your kindness?" Helen reached out and took Rebecca's hand, looking directly into her eyes. "Do you remember what I told the police officer on the phone? About how I was in your situation once?" Rebecca nodded. "I was 26 years old with a 2-year-old and a baby," Helen began, her voice steady but emotional. "My husband at the time, my first husband, was violent. Not at first. Never at first. They never are at first. But after the children came, everything changed. He became controlling, jealous, angry. He drank too much, and when he drank, he used his fists. I made excuses for him. I believed him when he said he'd change. I believed him when he said it was my fault that I provoked him. Until the day he raised his hand to my daughter." Helen's voice wavered, but she continued. "That's when I knew I had to leave. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money. I didn't have anywhere to go. My own family had disowned me for marrying him in the first place against their wishes. So I literally just walked out one day when he was at work, carrying one child and holding the hand of the other, with one bag of clothes and nothing else." "What did you do?" Rebecca asked quietly. "I wandered around for hours trying to figure out where to go. I ended up at a church." The first morning in Helen's house felt like waking up in a dream. Emma opened her eyes slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. The ceiling above her was clean and white, not the weathered wood planks of the shed roof. The air smelled like fresh laundry and something cooking downstairs, not the damp earth and mildew she'd grown used to. Soft morning light filtered through actual curtains on an actual window. She sat up carefully, not wanting to wake Sophie, and looked around the room. Their room. The pale yellow walls looked warm and cheerful in the morning light. There was a dresser with their names written on little labels for each drawer. A bookshelf already had some books on it, children's books that Helen must have kept from when her own kids were young. On the wall was a framed picture of flowers that made Emma think of spring and new beginnings. The smell from downstairs was getting stronger and more delicious. Emma slipped out of bed, still wearing the clean pajamas Helen had given her the night before. They were soft and comfortable, obviously new, bought specifically for her. She padded quietly down the hallway in her bare feet, passing Tommy's room where she could hear him still sleeping, and the room where Mama and baby Grace were staying. The stairs creaked slightly as she walked down them, and by the time she reached the bottom, Helen was already standing in the doorway of the kitchen, smiling warmly. "Good morning, sweetheart," Helen said softly. keeping her voice low so she wouldn't wake the others. "You're up early. Did you sleep well?" Emma nodded, suddenly shy. Everything was so new, so different, so overwhelming in the best possible way. "I smelled something cooking," she said quietly. "Bacon," Helen confirmed with a smile. "And I'm making pancakes too. I wasn't sure what everyone liked for breakfast, so I made a bit of everything. We'll figure out favorites as we go along. Come on, you can help me if you'd like." In the kitchen, Emma watched in amazement as Helen moved around with practiced ease. There was a griddle on the stove with pancakes cooking. Bacon was sizzling in a pan. The table was already set with plates and glasses and silverware. Real dishes, Emma noticed. Not paper plates or plastic cups. The kind of table setting that meant family meals and normal life. "Can you help me check if these pancakes are ready to flip?" Helen asked, holding out a spatula. "You lift the edge just a little bit like this and see if it's golden brown." Emma took the spatula carefully and did as Helen showed her. The pancake was perfectly golden, and when she flipped it, she felt a surge of pride at doing it successfully. "Perfect," Helen praised. "You're a natural. Maybe you can be in charge of pancakes from now on." The idea that there would be a from now on, that this wasn't just one morning, but many mornings to come, made Emma's chest feel warm and full. One by one, the rest of the family woke up. Sophie came down, rubbing her eyes, her hair sticking up in every direction, and climbed immediately into a chair at the table. Tommy appeared looking suspicious and guarded, still not quite ready to trust that this was all real and would last. Rebecca came down carrying baby Grace, looking more rested than she had in months, though still clearly recovering. The breakfast was something out of a movie. Plates piled with pancakes, bacon crispy and perfect, fresh fruit in a bowl, orange juice in a glass pitcher. Everyone sat around the table together, and for a few minutes the only sound was eating. The kind of focused eating that comes from children who'd been hungry for too long, finally having enough food in front of them. "So," Helen said, once everyone had taken the edge off their hunger, "I thought today we could go shopping for some things you all need. Clothes definitely, since I know you don't have much. School supplies too, because we'll need to get you all enrolled in school soon. And maybe we can pick out some things for your rooms, let you choose some decorations or posters or whatever you'd like to make them feel more like yours." Tommy looked up from his pancakes, his face skeptical. "That's going to cost a lot of money," he said bluntly. "We don't have money to pay you back." Helen's expression softened with understanding. This child had been forced to think like an adult for too long, to worry about money and costs and debts when he should have been thinking about video games and baseball. "Tommy, let me explain something to you," Helen said gently. "When I offered your family a home, I meant it. That includes providing the things you need. Clothes aren't optional, they're necessary. Same with school supplies. I'm not keeping a tab. I'm not expecting to be paid back. I'm doing this because I want to, because I can, and because helping your family brings me joy. Do you understand?" Tommy's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back stubbornly. "But why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why would you do all this for people you don't even know?" "Because someone did it for me once," Helen replied simply. "And because your family deserves help. You deserve to be kids again, to worry about kid things like what cartoon character should be on your backpack. Not about whether there's enough food or where you'll sleep tonight." Sophie, who had been listening quietly while eating her pancakes, suddenly spoke up. "Can I get a princess backpack?" she asked hopefully. The tension broke and everyone laughed, even Tommy. "Yes, Sophie," Helen said with a warm smile. "You can absolutely get a princess backpack." They spent the whole day shopping, and it was simultaneously wonderful and overwhelming. Helen took them to stores Emma had only been in once or twice in her life, the kind where everything was new and clean and smelled like possibility. She let each child pick out a week's worth of clothes plus extras, underwear and socks, pajamas and shoes, coats for the coming winter. Tommy picked out jeans and t-shirts, practical and simple, but Helen noticed him eyeing a science kit in the toy section, and quietly added it to the cart when he wasn't looking. Emma chose a dress with flowers on it, something she'd been wanting for so long, and when she saw herself in the fitting room mirror, she actually cried. Sophie got her princess backpack and a matching lunchbox, plus a new stuffed animal to keep her bunny company. For the baby, Helen bought more clothes than Grace would probably wear before growing out of them, but she couldn't help herself. Tiny socks and soft onesies and little hats that made Grace look adorable. diapers and formula and bottles, everything a baby needed. Rebecca kept trying to keep track of prices to limit what was being bought, to protest that it was too much. But Helen was firm. "This is what grandmothers do," she said. "They spoil their grandchildren, and whether it's official or not, that's what you all are to me now, my family." At the school supply store, they got everything each child would need. Notebooks and pencils, crayons and markers, folders and binders. Helen let them each pick out their favorite colors and designs. She bought a globe for Tommy because he'd mentioned being interested in geography. She got Emma a journal with a lock on it because every girl needs a place to write private thoughts. She found stickers and coloring books for Sophie. By the time they got home, the car was completely full of bags and boxes. It took 3 trips to get everything inside. Helen had the kids take their things up to their rooms to put away, and for the next hour, the house was filled with the sounds of children unpacking, discovering, claiming space as their own. Officer Sarah and Officer Chen stopped by that evening to check on everyone. They'd called ahead, not wanting to intrude, but Helen had insisted they come for dinner. She'd made a pot roast with vegetables, the kind of hearty meal that fills a house with wonderful smells and makes everyone feel cared for. Sitting around the dinner table, with all 4 children and Rebecca and Helen and the 2 police officers who'd started this all, felt right. It felt like family, the kind that isn't always related by blood but by choice and circumstance and love. "How's everyone settling in?" Officer Chen asked, watching the children eat with obvious satisfaction. "Good," Tommy said, and then, with more enthusiasm than he'd shown about anything in days, "Grandma Maggie got me a science kit. It has real experiments in it. I can make a volcano and everything." "That's wonderful," Officer Sarah said, smiling. She turned to Emma. "And how are you doing, sweetheart? You were so brave that night." Emma looked down at her plate, suddenly shy with all the attention. "I'm okay," she said quietly. "I'm happy we're here. I'm happy Mama is better. I'm happy we don't have to hide anymore. You saved your family," Officer Chen said seriously. "You should be very proud of yourself, Emma. Not many kids your age would have had the courage to do what you did." Sophie piped up from her seat. "Emma's always brave. She's the bravest sister ever. Even when she's scared, she does brave things." Emma's cheeks turned pink, but she was smiling. After dinner, while Helen and Rebecca cleaned up the kitchen and the officers played a board game with the kids in the living room, there was a sense of normalcy that had been missing from all their lives for so long. The house was full of laughter and conversation, and the comfortable noise of people just being together. Later that night, after the officers had left and the children had been bathed and put to bed, Helen sat with Rebecca in the living room. Baby Grace was asleep in a bassinet nearby, and the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. "I've been thinking about next steps," Rebecca said, cradling a cup of tea in her hands. "I need to get back to work as soon as I'm able." 6 months passed like a dream that slowly became reality. The autumn leaves that had been falling when Emma first led the police officers through the woods had given way to winter snow, then spring flowers, and now it was late spring with summer approaching. Everything had changed in those 6 months, not just for Rebecca and her children, but for an entire community that had learned what was possible when people chose to care. The local police department was holding a special community ceremony, and the station house was decorated with banners and balloons. It had been promoted in the local news for weeks, and the small auditorium was packed with people. Community members, local officials, representatives from domestic violence organizations, teachers from the children's school, and of course, the family at the center of it all. Emma sat in the front row between her mother and Grandma Maggie, wearing a new dress that Grandma Maggie had bought specially for today. She was nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, not quite understanding why so many people had come to see her. Tommy sat on Rebecca's other side, looking uncomfortable in the dress shirt and tie Grandma Maggie had insisted he wear. Sophie was on Grandma Maggie's lap, content and happy. Baby Grace, now 10 months old and thriving, was being passed between Rebecca and Helen, babbling happily and unaware of the significance of the occasion. The police chief stepped up to the podium, and the crowd quieted down. He was a stern-looking man with gray hair and decades of service on his face, but when he smiled at Emma, his whole expression softened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying through the room, "we're gathered here today to honor courage. Not the kind of courage that comes from training or experience. Not the kind that comes from being armed and prepared, but the kind of courage that comes from a child's heart, from pure love and desperation and the refusal to give up on family. He gestured toward Emma, who shrank a little in her seat, overwhelmed by the attention. 6 months ago, a 7-year-old girl did something remarkable. Faced with a sick mother, a crying infant, and siblings who were cold and scared and running out of options, she made the brave decision to leave them in order to save them. She walked through dark streets alone, searching for help, until she found 2 of our officers at a red light. The chief paused, looking directly at Emma. "Young lady, what you did that night took extraordinary courage. You trusted strangers in uniform to help you. You led them through the woods to your family. You asked for help when asking for help is one of the hardest things anyone can do. And because of your bravery, your entire family is safe, healthy, and thriving today." The crowd erupted in applause, and Emma felt her face grow hot with embarrassment and pride mixed together. Rebecca squeezed her hand, tears already streaming down her face. "It is my honor," the chief continued, "to present Emma Morrison with the Citizens' Commendation for Bravery. This award is given to civilians who perform acts of exceptional courage in service to their community. Emma is the youngest recipient in our city's history." Emma walked up to the podium with her mother's hand in hers, too nervous to go alone. The chief knelt down to her level and pinned a medal to her dress. It was beautiful, with a ribbon and a shiny gold medallion that caught the light. He shook her hand formally, treating her with the same respect he'd give any adult recipient. "You're a hero, Emma," he said quietly, just loud enough for her and her mother to hear. "Don't ever forget that." Cameras flashed and the applause continued. Officer Chen and Officer Sarah, both in their dress uniforms, stood and applauded along with everyone else, their faces showing the pride they felt in this little girl they'd come to care about so much. But the ceremony wasn't over. The chief had more to say. "This story doesn't end with one family being saved," he continued once everyone sat back down. "Emma's courage started something much bigger. It reminded our entire community of what matters most. It showed us that we have the power to help each other, to lift each other up, to be the difference between despair and hope." He gestured to a woman standing at the side of the room. "Mrs. Patterson, would you please come up?" A middle-aged woman walked to the front and she looked emotional as she accepted the microphone. "6 months ago I saw Emma's story on the news," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I heard about a family living in the woods, about a mother trying so hard to keep her children safe, and about a community that rallied to help them. It moved me deeply. It also made me look around my own community and ask what I could do." She paused, gathering herself. "I'm the director of a nonprofit organization now called Emma's Network. We were inspired by this family's story to create a program that connects families in crisis with community volunteers who can offer temporary housing, childcare, job assistance, and support. In the past 6 months, we've helped 17 families find safe housing. We've connected 12 women escaping domestic violence with legal services and protection. We've placed 23 children in safe, supportive temporary homes while their parents got back on their feet." The audience applauded again, and Mrs. Patterson smiled through her tears. None of this would exist without Emma's courage and her family's story reminding us all that there are people in our own backyards who need help, and that we have the power to provide it. Others came forward to speak. The representative from the domestic violence shelter talked about the increase in funding and support they'd received since the story went public. A local business owner talked about the jobs program they'd started specifically to hire people trying to escape abusive situations, offering flexible hours and understanding employers. A teacher from the children's school talked about the tutoring program established to help kids who'd experienced trauma and disruption get back on track. Academically, Emma's story had created ripples that spread far beyond one family, touching hundreds of lives, changing systems, opening eyes and hearts. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, she walked to the podium slowly, still not entirely comfortable with public speaking, but determined to say what needed to be said. She looked out at the crowd of faces, some familiar and some not, all looking back at her with kindness and support. 6 months ago, Rebecca began, her voice soft but steady. I was living in a shed in the woods with my 4 children. I had been there for 3 weeks and I was sick, getting sicker every day. My baby wouldn't stop crying. I was out of options and out of hope. I truly believed we weren't going to make it much longer. She took a breath, looking down at her children in the front row. I had tried everything to keep us safe and together. I'd left an abusive marriage. I'd gone to a shelter. I'd worked multiple jobs. I'd saved money. I'd done everything right, or at least I tried to. But the system, as well-meaning as it is, couldn't keep us safe once my ex-husband found us. And suddenly I had no good choices left. Just impossible choices. Her voice grew stronger. I chose the woods because I thought it was better than the streets and better than letting my children be separated in foster care. I told myself I just needed a few more weeks, just a little more time to save enough money for a deposit on an apartment. But I was fooling myself. I was dying, slowly, and I was too stubborn and too proud and too scared to ask for help. She looked at Emma, who was watching her with those serious eyes. My daughter saved us. She did what I couldn't do. She asked for help. And when she did, she didn't just save our family. She showed an entire community what's possible when we choose to care about each other. Rebecca's voice broke with emotion. I want to thank Officer Chen and Officer Sarah for trusting my daughter and following her into those woods. I want to thank Helen Winters, who everyone now knows as Grandma Maggie, for opening her home and her heart to us. I want to thank every single person who donated clothes or food or money or time or support. I want to thank the organizations that provided services. I want to thank the community that surrounded us with love when we needed it most. She wiped her eyes. But most of all, I want every parent out there who's struggling, who's in an impossible situation, who's trying to figure out how to keep their children safe, to know that asking for help is not weakness. Asking for help is not failure. Asking for help is one of the bravest things you can do. My 7-year-old daughter taught me that. And because she was brave enough to ask, we're all standing here today healthy and safe and together. The applause was thunderous, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. People stood offering Rebecca a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. She returned to her seat, and Grandma Maggie immediately wrapped her in a hug while the children clustered around her. After the ceremony, there was a reception with cake and refreshments. Emma found herself surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to tell her how brave she was. It was overwhelming and wonderful and a little bit scary all at once. Officer Sarah found her in a quiet corner, taking a break from all the attention. She sat down next to Emma, offering her a plate with a piece of cake. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked gently. "It's a lot," Emma admitted. "Everyone keeps calling me a hero, but I don't feel like a hero. I just did what I had to do to help my mama." "That's exactly what heroes do," Sarah replied. "They do what needs to be done even when it's hard.